Insurance fraud is a growing problem in Minnesota, largely due to the fact that it is a no-fault state like Florida and New York, and organized criminal rings are migrating from those states to Minnesota to take advantage of loopholes in the no-fault auto insurance laws. NICB has seen a significant increase in questionable claims related to no-fault as well as other insurance fraud. But no-fault isn't the only area where the fraud is rampant in the land of 10,000 lakes. Over $850 million in insurance claims were reported from a hailstorm that swept through Minnesota last August, and according to the Insurance Federation of Minnesota, about 10% of those claims may have been fraudulent.
One thing about criminals, they don't discriminate, regardless of property insurance, auto insurance. They find the weaknesses in everything, and they know where the weak spots are. They know that Minnesota has less stringent laws in other states. Well, that's why our data shows, we have a study on reverse migration of fraud. Our study shows that Minnesota has become one of the top 2 or 3 havens nationwide to where criminals are moving in because of a less aggressive environment. That's a problem.
That is why the NICB and Minnesota lawmakers are turning up the heat on those criminal acts. Last month, members of the Senate Commerce Committee's Working Group on Insurance Fraud held a press conference to announce a new legislation bill aimed at preventing this kind of fraud.
Insurance fraud is estimated to cost the average Minnesota family about $1,400 a year in higher insurance premiums and other costs because of fraud. It is not a victimless crime. Virtually everybody in the state of Minnesota pays the price for insurance fraud. There has been a documented increase in the level of insurance fraud in Minnesota in recent years, and there's a very alarming statistic that was released just last year by the NICB that showed that Minnesota led the nation in the increase in organized criminal activity involved in insurance fraud, particularly auto insurance fraud. And those are statistics that should alarm every single Minnesotan. We should send a strong message to folks who come here, especially from out of state and even other countries, to defraud Minnesota consumers, and that message is go home.
The bill would close loopholes in the processing of claims, information sharing, investigation, and prosecutions.
I really see a lot of shift in our criminal activity where you've got people who may have been involved in dealing drugs who are now engaged in financial fraud schemes. And we see insurance fraud being a part of that. And so whenever you have systems, for instance, like the no-fault system or whatever it is, I think that we should have our policymakers, and that's what's happening here today at the state level, they're paying attention to all of this and trying to make sure that we have the tools from a civil perspective and also from a criminal perspective to ensure that we hold accountable those offenders who commit those frauds. And again, when we're talking about financial fraud and insurance fraud, no one should ever be left with the impression that these are victimless crimes. In fact, this affects everybody.
We don't want Minnesota to be a magnet state for people that want to commit crime to come here. And what we found is there's not very many states that are like Minnesota as far as not holding people more accountable than they should. And therefore, the idea is the fraud is more likely to happen here, and that's why we see people coming here.
If this legislative package comes into place, fraudsters will have to pack up and leave Minnesota and find somewhere else to do their crimes. From the state capitol in St. Paul, I'm Brian Dreifelt for the National Insurance Crime Bureau.